I sat at the Thanksgiving table with a broken arm, expecting sympathy, but my daughter smiled and said, "My husband taught him a lesson." That's when I realized the people I trusted most had turned against me, and I would make them pay. The turkey was still warm when I realized my family no longer saw me as a man. My daughter smiled, my wife poured wine, and I sat there, arm broken, pride bleeding. But I would make them pay. Welcome to your ultimate destination for gripping revenge stories, family betrayals, shocking betrayals, and emotional justice. Dive into tales where heartbreak turns into fury, secrets are exposed, and justice is served. Each story will keep you on the edge of your seat, questioning loyalty, trust, and morality. Subscribe now and join a community that loves suspense, drama, and stories that hit deep, because everyone wants to see justice served. Are you ready to witness the ultimate payback? Let's get started. The chandelier above the dining table hummed faintly, its yellow glow painting soft halos over silverware and glass. Laughter used to live here once. Now it hovered like an unwelcome ghost. Brandon shifted in his seat, his sling biting into his neck. Every movement sent a pulse of pain down his arm, but he forced a calm smile. Evelyn carved the turkey with surgical precision. "Careful, dear," she said sweetly. "Wouldn't want you to hurt the other arm." Clara giggled. She was 23 now, sharp-eyed, college-educated, and suddenly a mirror of her mother's cruelty. Brandon's throat tightened. "I'm fine," he murmured. "Of course you are," Evelyn replied, setting a plate in front of him with practiced grace. After all, pain builds character. The words slid through the air like a blade wrapped in silk. Clara leaned back in her chair, swirling wine. "Dad finally learned his lesson," she said casually. The room fell into a polite, poisonous silence. Brandon's fingers trembled around his fork. He could hear the wall clock ticking, each click marking another second of his quiet humiliation. He looked at his daughter, his little girl who once climbed onto his shoulders to hang Christmas lights, and saw nothing familiar. Only distance. Only Evelyn's influence. "What lesson was that, Clara?" he asked softly. She smiled. "That you're not the boss here anymore." Evelyn laughed, low, satisfied, intimate in its cruelty. "Don't start an argument on Thanksgiving, Brandon. You've already done enough damage this year." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Silence had become his last defense. The same silence that let them believe he was harmless, obedient, broken. Dinner dragged on. Evelyn recounted stories of her promotion, conveniently skipping how Brandon's overtime paid her tuition years ago. Clara bragged about her new apartment, though Brandon knew whose savings funded the down payment. He listened as they toasted to family, a word that now tasted like rust. When Evelyn reached for the cranberry sauce, she brushed against his broken arm deliberately. Pain shot through him. He winced. "Oops," she said. No apology, only a smirk. He excused himself and stepped outside onto the porch. The night air bit at his face, sharp and cold. Across the street, other families glowed through windows. Laughter, music, love. He stared at his reflection in the glass door. The sling, the bruises, the hollow eyes. The man staring back wasn't weak. He was waiting. From inside came Evelyn's voice. "Don't worry about him, Clara. He just needs to remember who runs this house." Brandon closed his eyes. Something deep within him, the part that once forgave, once hoped, snapped like a brittle bone. He thought of every insult dressed as a joke, every silent dinner, every manipulation disguised as care. For years he believed endurance was strength. Now he understood. Endurance was surrender. He looked up at the dark sky, his breath visible in the cold. "Never again," he whispered. When he walked back inside, his steps were measured, his face unreadable. He poured himself a glass of water, lifted it with his good hand, and smiled faintly. "Thank you for dinner," he said. "It's one I won't forget." Neither Evelyn nor Clara noticed the change in his voice. Too calm, too certain. But the house did. The air shifted, and somewhere between the ticking clock and the faint hum of the chandelier, the first spark of vengeance caught fire. Morning light crawled across the kitchen tiles, touching the untouched coffee mug on the counter. Brandon sat alone, his sling resting on the table beside him. He had slept little. Every time he closed his eyes, the dinner replayed in fragments. Clara's smirk, Evelyn's laugh, the echo of lesson learned. The house felt colder now, though the thermostat read the same. Evelyn's perfume still lingered in the hallway, faint but invasive. He stared at his reflection in the microwave door, tired, graying, unrecognizable. His phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn. Don't forget to pick up Clara's car from the mechanic. You're still useful for something. He read it twice. The words weren't new. They were just louder now. Brandon rose slowly. His arm throbbed, but the pain had become background noise. He opened the cabinet, looking for a bottle of painkillers, and his eyes landed on an old photograph pinned to the inside of the door. It was from Clara's 10th birthday, him holding her as she blew out candles, Evelyn smiling beside them. He touched the photo with his good hand. When did we lose this? He thought. Then a sharper question followed. Or was it ever real? That afternoon, Evelyn returned home early. She looked immaculate, draped in her usual confidence. Did you handle the car? Yes, Brandon said quietly. Good. She took off her coat. You might not be strong, but at least you can still drive. He didn't answer. His silence unsettled her. She noticed but said nothing. He simply watched her pour a glass of wine at 2 in the afternoon. As she scrolled through her phone, Evelyn chuckled. You know, my friends think I'm brave for putting up with you. They said most women would have left a man who can't even protect himself. Brandon's jaw tightened. Protect from what? Her smile was sharp. From life, Brandon. You've always been too gentle for it. He turned away, walked to the living room, and stopped at the window. Outside, a group of children were tossing leaves into the air, laughing freely. Their laughter stabbed him, not because it mocked him, but because it reminded him of what he'd lost. Behind him, Evelyn spoke again. Don't look so tragic. Maybe if you stop feeling sorry for yourself, things will change. He turned his head slightly. Things will change, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried something new, a weight Evelyn didn't recognize. That night, when the house slept, Brandon sat at his desk in the dark. His sling was gone. His arm still hurt, but he no longer needed it. He took out a notebook and began to write. Dates, events, things Evelyn said, accounts she controlled. Every insult became a line of evidence. Every wound, a ledger entry. He wrote until dawn, filling pages with a calm precision that scared him. When he finally closed the notebook, his hand was steady. He wasn't writing for pity anymore. He was building a case. Not for the police, not for the world, but for himself. At 6 a.m., Evelyn walked past him on her way to work. You're still up? She asked. Couldn't sleep. She shrugged. Try not to mope all day. He smiled faintly. I won't. I've got a lot to plan. She didn't ask what. She didn't care. And that was her first mistake. As the door shut behind her, Brandon exhaled slowly. In that quiet, morning light, he realized something simple, terrifying, and liberating. He wasn't afraid of them anymore. The lesson they tried to teach him had finally been learned, but not in the way they intended. The house was quiet again, but Brandon felt no peace. Each room echoed with Evelyn's laughter, Clara's casual cruelty, and the memory of his own weakness. He moved carefully through the hallways, studying the way his family lived in comfort while he nursed his broken arm and bruised pride. Every detail became a blueprint. He started cataloging financial records, text messages, forgotten promises, and even offhand remarks. Every slight was a thread, and Brandon was beginning to weave them into a trap. He didn't need to confront them now. He only needed patience, observation, precision. At night, he replayed Thanksgiving in his mind, the clinking of cutlery, the false warmth of conversation, Clara's voice echoing, Dad finally learned his lesson. The phrase became a drumbeat in his skull. Each repetition sharpened his resolve. He would not be mocked again. He trained himself silently, not physically, though the sling's weight reminded him of the lingering pain, but mentally. He imagined every possible reaction from Evelyn, every feigned smile, every sarcastic word. He calculated, mapped, and anticipated. Revenge was no longer a fantasy. It was inevitable. Brandon also began using small acts of compliance as camouflage. He smiled when Evelyn boasted, helped Clara with errands, and even offered polite advice on minor household matters. They saw the old man again, docile and fragile. They didn't notice the quiet fire building behind his calm eyes. Sometimes he caught glimpses of himself in mirrors and windows. The man staring back was not broken. He was patient, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment. Rage had turned into control. He wrote notes to himself. Do nothing that reveals intent. Let them underestimate you. Every word, every gesture, is a move in a game they cannot see. Night after night, the house became his laboratory. Every meal, every glance, every casual comment from Evelyn or Clara fed him data. He visualized their downfall, layer by layer, and it excited him more than fear ever had. One evening, Clara lingered after dinner, helping clear the table. "Dad, are you really okay?" she asked, tentative. Brandon looked at her, calm and measured. "I'm fine, Clara. Just thinking." Her eyes searched his face for weakness. She found none. "Not yet." He smiled faintly. "Tell me, what would you do if someone kept underestimating you for years?" Clara paused. She didn't answer. Brandon returned to his study that night, notebook in hand. Every humiliation, every insult, every bruise, physical or emotional, was documented. He wasn't angry anymore. He was methodical. The descent into darkness wasn't reckless. It was deliberate. By the end of the week, Brandon realized one terrifying truth. He had become unrecognizable, even to himself. But for the first time in years, he felt alive. Every small act of obedience had been a mask. Behind it, his mind was sharp, his patience endless. The house that had humiliated him would soon become the arena for his quiet, surgical justice. And in the silence, he whispered to no one, "You won't see me coming until it's too late." What would you do if your own family betrayed you? Comment below. Would you fight back or stay silent like Brandon? Brandon had become a shadow in his own home, moving quietly, listening carefully, noting patterns he once ignored. Each day he observed Evelyn's routines, the way she double-checked her phone, how she counted the cash she controlled, and the subtle ways she exerted power over Clara. Every detail became ammunition. He started small. The first act of subtle revenge was financial. A few canceled automatic payments, slight misalignments in her meticulous ledgers. Evelyn noticed a discrepancy at first and blamed the bank. Brandon only smiled quietly to himself. The old man, they thought, was harmless. Clara, meanwhile, began questioning her mother's authority. "Mom, did you check the statements?" "Something's off," she said, casually, almost afraid. Evelyn waved it away. But Brandon noticed her hesitation. It was a crack, however small. Every word, every smile, every gesture he made was calculated. At the dinner table, he asked questions, lightly probing the small cracks in Evelyn's self-assuredness. She answered with a tight tone, carefully controlled, but Brandon saw it. The subtle signs of unease, a pause too long, a finger tapping nervously, a glance that flickered toward him and then away. One afternoon, while Evelyn bragged to a friend over the phone about her perfect household, Brandon intentionally forgot to deliver a routine message she relied on. The result was chaos in her carefully structured day. Appointments missed, schedules disrupted. Evelyn's calm facade began to crumble under small, consistent pressure. Brandon's revenge was silent but effective. He didn't yell. He didn't strike. He let the psychological weight of oversight and betrayal accumulate. He watched as the once confident matriarch began questioning her own control, slowly realizing the house she dominated was no longer fully under her command. At night, Brandon recorded every reaction, every slip, in his notebook. He replayed conversations in his mind, noting Evelyn's weaknesses, Clara's loyalty cracks, and their growing vulnerability. Each observation sharpened his next move. Then one evening, Clara lingered in the hallway, fidgeting nervously. She hesitated before asking, "Dad, are you really okay with all this?" Brandon looked at her, calm, measured. "I'm more than okay," he replied softly. "Sometimes, the quietest people are the most dangerous." The next day, Evelyn stormed into the kitchen, finding minor things misplaced, small documents shuffled, and subtle changes in the household she couldn't explain. Panic flickered behind her eyes. Brandon served tea calmly, smiling faintly, letting her guess where the chaos had begun. She never suspected him. By the end of the week, Brandon had established dominance not through force, but through observation, strategy, and patience. Every small disruption tested Evelyn's control, weakened her confidence, and made Clara reconsider where her loyalties truly lay. Brandon had become invisible and deadly. He poured himself a glass of water and looked toward the dining room, thinking, soon, the real lesson will begin. If you were in Brandon's shoes, would you strike back quietly like him or confront them openly? Comment below. How far would you go to reclaim control? Brandon sat at his desk late that night, the house silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. He opened his notebook, reviewing every note, every observation, every discrepancy he had meticulously recorded. Then he found it. A subtle pattern he had overlooked. The accident that broke his arm was no accident at all. He traced the timeline back, connecting fragments of memory with evidence. Clara had been instructed by Evelyn. Every step, every small push, every careless moment was orchestrated. Evelyn had wanted to humiliate him publicly, to prove her dominance once and for all. The realization struck him like a blow. He had assumed the cruelty was petty, reactionary, a result of her pride. But no, this was deliberate, calculated, personal. Brandon felt the familiar burn of rage, but it was different now. Cool, precise, and controlled. He was no longer the victim of chance. He was the heir of information. The betrayal was complete, and clarity settled in his chest like a sharpened knife. He remembered Clara's words at the table, her casual smile. Dad finally learned his lesson. She had been trained to echo her mother's cruelty, to participate in his public humiliation. For a moment, he felt a pang of sorrow. Her innocence had been weaponized. But he pushed it aside. Empathy would come later. Strategy came first. Brandon leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a small, tight smile. Evelyn had revealed her weakness without knowing it. She had underestimated him for years, and now, with the truth in his hands, the tide had shifted. He began to plan anew, incorporating this revelation. No longer was his strategy simply subtle disruption. Now, it would be surgical, exposing both Evelyn and Clara's complicity without alerting them. The lesson they had tried to teach him would return, amplified, reflected back through their own actions. As he mapped it all out, he felt a surge of control he hadn't experienced in years. Every humiliation he endured had become a stepping stone toward this moment. Every sleepless night, every dismissive glance, every sarcastic remark, it all fed the fire that now burned inside him, steady and unyielding. Brandon rose, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet street. In the reflection, he saw a man transformed, not weak, not broken, but patient, calculating, and inevitable. The house that had caged him would soon be a stage for his revelation, and his family would finally see the consequences of their cruelty. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. They wanted to teach me a lesson, he whispered to the empty room. I'll make sure they understand mine. That night, he returned to his notebook and began outlining the final stages of his plan. Every move was deliberate, every word calculated. The victim was gone. Only the strategist remained. By dawn, Brandon had drawn a new map of the household. Weaknesses, habits, vulnerabilities. The revelation wasn't just information, it was power. And for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Anticipation. Revenge wasn't about rage anymore. It was about precision, inevitability, and poetic justice. What would you do if you discovered your own family betrayed you so completely? Could you stay silent like Brandon, or would you act immediately? Comment below, we want to know your choice. The morning sun fell softly across the kitchen tiles, but the air remained heavy with unspoken tension. Brandon poured himself coffee and watched Clara carefully, noticing how her once proud posture now carried hesitation. Something had shifted. She was no longer fully aligned with Evelyn. That evening, after dinner, Brandon found her in the living room, idly flipping through old photo albums. Clara, he began softly. Do you remember this one? He held up a picture of her as a child, perched on his shoulders during a summer festival. She smiled faintly, but there was a shadow in her eyes. Yeah, I remember, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Brandon took a deep breath. I know you've been following your mother's rules, but I want you to understand something. Some things are never truly your fault. Sometimes, people just exploit love. Clara hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. I know, but I didn't know it was wrong. He nodded. I understand. But now you do. And maybe we can fix it, together. For the first time in weeks, Brandon felt the fragile stirrings of connection. He wasn't just planning revenge anymore. He was shaping a future where trust could return, even if partially. He could teach Clara the difference between fear and respect, obedience and loyalty. Over the next few days, he and Clara began a quiet dance. She observed him carefully, noticing the calm precision in every move, the patient strategy behind every word. He never demanded her loyalty. He offered clarity, guidance, and perspective. Slowly, she began confiding small truths, secrets about Evelyn's manipulations, minor lies, hidden plans. Brandon absorbed it all, integrating these details into his mental map. But even in this fragile alliance, danger lurked. Brandon reminded himself constantly, trust was earned, not given. Any misstep could unravel the delicate balance he had begun to establish. The house remained a battlefield. Now, however, he had an ally whose conscience could tip the scales. One evening, Clara lingered after clearing the table. "Dad, are we really going to do this?" she asked, hesitating. Brandon looked at her, calm and unwavering. "We aren't just doing it to hurt her. We're doing it to restore balance, to show that cruelty cannot hide forever." She nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. In her silence, Brandon felt both hope and caution. Redemption was possible, but only if he remained patient and precise. By the end of the week, their small alliance had begun to shift the household dynamics. Evelyn still believed she was in control, unaware that her carefully constructed hierarchy was quietly unraveling. Brandon's calm authority, reinforced by Clara's cautious loyalty, was creating the cracks that would soon become chasms. As he closed his notebook that night, Brandon felt a rare sense of purpose. He realized that revenge could coexist with redemption, and that sometimes the first step toward justice was teaching the next generation what true strength looked like. He poured himself a glass of water and looked toward the hallway where Evelyn's laughter echoed. He didn't feel fear. He felt inevitability. The lesson they had tried to teach him was about to be returned, carefully, patiently, and with precision. If you were Brandon, would you trust your own child to help you execute revenge? Could you forgive, or would betrayal make it impossible? Comment below and share your thoughts. The house felt heavier that evening. Brandon had spent the day carefully observing Evelyn's habits while Clara followed discreetly, relaying subtle information. Together, they had begun dismantling her control, piece by piece. But that night, something unexpected happened. Clara hesitated in the hallway, her face pale. "Dad, I told Mom something." Brandon froze. The notebook on the table felt heavier in his hand, the words inside now a dangerous weapon in the wrong hands. "What did you tell her?" His voice was calm but sharp, cutting through the quiet of the living room. I thought she deserved to know you were planning to expose her. I didn't want her to make a mistake," Clara stammered. A cold wave of realization swept over Brandon. His carefully constructed strategy, the foundation of his patient revenge, had been compromised. Evelyn would now anticipate moves he hadn't even executed. He took a deep breath, forcing calm over the surge of fury. Rage would have been easy, but it would have destroyed the advantage he had spent months cultivating. Evelyn entered the room, her posture triumphant, eyes glinting with satisfaction. Well, she said, her voice smooth and venomous. "Seems someone's been honest with me." "How thoughtful of you, Clara." Brandon met her gaze steadily, hiding the storm inside. "Yes," he said quietly. "Honesty, even when it's dangerous." Evelyn smirked, circling him like a predator. "You really thought you could outmaneuver me in my own house?" Clara shrank back, guilt written on her face. Brandon's heart ached for her, but there was no time for sentiment. He realized the alliance he had cautiously nurtured was fragile, easily broken by fear or misplaced loyalty. The very person he had begun to trust most had inadvertently revealed his plan to the one he despised most. He retreated to his study under the guise of composing himself. Alone, he reviewed the notebook, revisiting every detail. Every act of revenge would now require adaptation. He could feel the darkness pressing against him, frustration, fury, despair. This was his crucible. Brandon knew he couldn't allow fear or anger to control him. He had to think several steps ahead. The betrayal, though painful, revealed a critical truth. Vengeance was never simple, and even allies could falter. The key was to remain patient, adaptive, and relentless. As Evelyn celebrated her perceived victory, Brandon formulated the next phase of his plan. Every minor disruption, every calculated move he had made until now, had taught him one lesson. Control was not given, it was taken. Even betrayal could become a tool. By midnight, Brandon emerged from the study. His arm, once broken, had healed, but more importantly, his mind was sharper than ever. He looked at Clara with measured calm. "We'll fix this," he said softly. "Together. And they will regret underestimating us." The house, once a place of humiliation, now felt like a stage. Every footstep, every glance, every whispered word could be weaponized. Brandon understood the true cost of revenge. Trust was fragile, and darkness could slip through the smallest crack. But he would endure. And somewhere in the silence of the night, he whispered, "This lesson isn't over, it's only beginning." Have you ever trusted someone only to be betrayed? How would you respond if the person you depended on turned against you? Comment below. Could you recover, or would the betrayal break you? Thanksgiving morning returned, but this year, the house felt different. Brandon moved through the halls with quiet authority, his arm fully healed, his gaze steady. Evelyn, oblivious to the depth of his planning, smiled proudly, convinced she remained in control. She did not notice the subtle shifts, small files missing, whispered evidence collected, financial records manipulated. He called everyone to the table, just as they had done months ago. The chandelier's warm glow now illuminated faces that had once mocked him. Clara sat next to him, tentative but resolute. Brandon's calm presence unsettled Evelyn instantly. She had expected compliance, not composure. "Before we begin," Brandon said, his voice measured, "I think it's time we review some truths." Evelyn's brow furrowed. "Truths?" she echoed, a note of unease creeping into her voice. Brandon held up a stack of documents. Bank statements, recorded conversations, text messages, all evidence of manipulation, lies, and betrayal. "You orchestrated my accident," he said slowly, deliberately. "You used Clara to humiliate me publicly. Every move, every word, every lesson was part of your plan." Evelyn's face twisted with disbelief. "Brandon, that's impossible." Clara's eyes dropped to the table. "Mom, it's true," she whispered. The room went silent. Brandon continued, "And because of your arrogance, your empire of control is collapsing. Financial institutions, friends, colleagues, all now aware of the truth." Evelyn's hands trembled. For the first time, she felt powerless. Her carefully constructed dominance crumbled as Brandon calmly detailed every act of deception. Every lie, every manipulation reflected back on her. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words faltered. "CTA, what would you do if the one you underestimated finally exposed your secrets? Would you fight back, or accept the consequences? Comment below. Whose side are you on?" Brandon's calm authority contrasted sharply with the chaos unraveling around her. Clara, once complicit, now stood quietly beside him, her presence a reminder of both betrayal and potential redemption. Evelyn's facade cracked completely. "You ruined us," she shouted, desperation in her voice. Brandon leaned forward, voice steady and cold. "No, Evelyn. You taught me how." The weight of those words hung in the air like a blade. Every insult, every manipulation, every attempt to break him had returned to her in full measure. Justice was not violent. It was inevitable. By mid-afternoon, authorities arrived, alerted anonymously by Brandon to the financial irregularities and evidence of manipulation. Evelyn's world, once pristine and untouchable, fell apart in hours. Brandon watched quietly, the old humiliation replaced by something far stronger: satisfaction, clarity, and control regained. Afterward, he gathered his thoughts in the now silent house. He no longer felt rage, only a calm awareness that justice had been served. Clara approached him cautiously, and he nodded. She understood. The lessons of cruelty, betrayal, and survival had been learned, and now, she would have a chance to see a different way forward. Brandon looked around the house, the memories of years of humiliation washing over him. He no longer feared them. He had endured, adapted, and finally delivered the reckoning. The lesson was complete. The sun set outside, casting long shadows through the dining room where so many betrayals had been born. For Brandon, the house was no longer a prison. It was a testament. Cruelty has consequences, patience wields power, and the quietest man can make the loudest impact. Would you have the patience and precision to turn the tables like Brandon, or would revenge consume you before it could be measured? Comment your choice, justice or impulse. The house was quiet now. No laughter, no tension, only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling floorboards. Brandon walked through the halls, observing the subtle emptiness that followed a storm. Evelyn had been removed from control, her dominance shattered, her influence diminished. Clara stood beside him, silent but attentive, her eyes reflecting understanding and newfound respect. He sat at the dining table, once again alone, the remnants of Thanksgiving neatly stacked in the sink. His arm rested comfortably, fully healed, yet the pain he had endured lingered in memory like a faint echo. For the first time, he allowed himself to reflect, not on revenge, but on the journey that had brought him here. He thought of the humiliation, the betrayals, the careful planning, and the alliances forged and broken. Every moment had been a step toward clarity. He realized that revenge had been necessary, but it was not the ultimate goal. The lesson he had learned was patience, precision, and understanding the value of control over impulsive rage. Clara approached cautiously, holding a cup of tea. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked softly. Brandon smiled faintly, taking the cup. "I am," he said, warmth in his voice. "More than okay. I've learned something important about myself, about what it means to endure and reclaim your life." She nodded, a small smile forming. "I understand now. I see how much you went through and how careful you were." The moment felt like a bridge between the past and the future. Brandon realized that true power did not come from cruelty or domination. It came from clarity, resilience, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. His family had tested him, humiliated him, and betrayed him, but he had transformed that pain into strategy, justice, and, ultimately, wisdom. Was Brandon's revenge worth it? Could you turn humiliation into strength, or would it destroy you first? Comment below, share your thoughts on justice versus forgiveness. Brandon glanced around the room, noting small details, the chandelier casting long shadows, the polished table reflecting morning light, the silence that had replaced chaos. He remembered that first Thanksgiving dinner, the moment Clara had uttered the words that sparked everything. Dad finally learned his lesson. Now, the lesson was complete, but not in the way they intended. It was a lesson in resilience, patience, and the quiet, unstoppable force of a man who refused to be broken. He had reclaimed his dignity, taught Evelyn and Clara the consequences of cruelty, and restored a sense of balance in his household. He stood, stretching his shoulders, and moved to the window. The street outside was calm, the sky a pale morning blue. Life would continue, but he had changed. The house no longer symbolized humiliation. It was a testament to endurance and subtle mastery. Clara lingered by his side. "Dad, what now?" she asked. Brandon smiled, a calm, measured smile. "Now we live," he said. "We move forward. And we never forget the lessons we've learned about trust, control, and respect." The past was behind him. The house, once a prison of ridicule and manipulation, was now a place of quiet authority, careful reflection, and hard-won wisdom. Brandon had endured, adapted, and emerged transformed. He was no longer the man who had entered the dining room with a broken arm and a bruised spirit. He was stronger, sharper, and unshakably certain that patience and strategy would always outweigh cruelty. The sun climbed higher, casting light on the house that had witnessed humiliation, cunning, and finally, justice. Brandon sat quietly, sipping his tea, the world outside continuing. But within, he had found clarity, control, and peace. If you were in Brandon's shoes, how would you rebuild trust and authority after betrayal? Could revenge and redemption coexist? Comment below, we want to hear your story. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.